San Marcos, Texas. I was teaching at a two-teacher school out there. And a two-teacher school in West Texas in those days didn't have a whole lot of extra nice things. And so we had 2 rooms and connected to a sanctuary with a hallway and 2 toilets. The rooms are really Sabbath school rooms, but we used them as school rooms the rest of the week. And things were going fairly well my first year as a teacher, and then until the rain came. What am I going to do with these kids now that it's raining? And I can't let them play in the sanctuary. They're tired of the classroom. They'll tear up the toilets if they have to spend a half hour in there. In fact, they were pretty good tearing up the toilets anyway. One of them dropped a bomb down one of them one day, a cherry bomb. Blew it apart. They were a vigorous group of kids. They used to bring their horses and guns to class. And we'd go out and shoot in the afternoon. Anyway, we had a lot of fun. Yeah, and the other time he put a match, one of the kids, the 3 brothers, put a match and used an aerosol can and torched his brother's hair. That was exciting. Anyway, so we got the rain. I didn't know what to do with them, so I bought table games. I can't remember all the games I bought, but I remember one of them was checkers. I liked it. I didn't think anything about it. And about 3 days later, Stephen, one of the 3 brothers, comes up to me and he says, his dad was real strict. He says, Mr. Knight, do you know what my daddy says that Mrs. White says about checkers? And I looked at him and I said, Stephen, I'm pretty sure that I know what your daddy says that Mrs. White says about checkers. Don't play. I said, Stephen, have you ever read those statements? He said, nope. I said, well, I'm going to read them with you. But first, I have a question for your daddy. I want you to ask your daddy if it's all right to play Monopoly. Now, do you understand the principle of Monopoly? It's a very nice Christian game. It takes lots of time, but the object is to bankrupt thy neighbor. Yeah. You take all of his hotels, all of his houses, all of his property, and when you've really got everything that he's got, he's finished. Yeah. I always thought they should drill a hole in the middle of the board and just call it suicide. You know, that's how you exit the game. But if you want to play it on Sabbath, you just label it hell. No, it's a very anti-Christian game. It's do thy neighbor in. Rip him off. Get everything he's got.
No mercy.
No mercy.
And enjoy them.
About 2 days later, Stephen came back and he said, my daddy says it's all right to play Monopoly. Because why? Mrs. White didn't say anything about Monopoly. No concept of principle whatsoever. Mrs. White didn't say something about it, I don't even think Monopoly was invented, you know. No concept whatsoever, but he had a quotation on checkers, but he didn't have one on Monopoly. And whatever is wrong with checkers, Monopoly is 10 times as bad. So I read the quotations to Stephen. And I said, Stephen, now you got Stephen was about as red-blooded a kid as you can imagine. I mean, he was vigorous, outdoors, exercising all the times, in the trees. You know, I mean, he was just a real West Texas kid. I said, Stephen, if you had a choice between playing checkers or being outside exercising vigorously, running around, what would you do? He said, you know me. He said, I'd be outside running around. I said, Stephen, would you ever gamble with these things? No. I thought to myself, well, not in front of me anyway. Anyway, I said to Stephen, I've known you for a long time, and you've got some serious problems. But one of them is not checkers. If you had a choice, you'd be doing something else. You'd be out exercising. You have problems, Stephen, but you're not going to be wasting your life playing checkers. Only later, when I went up to Andrews to teach, I assigned one of my students the topic of checkers in Adventist history. And he went back into history and discovered some fascinating material. First, he discovered in 1865, when James White had his stroke, his first stroke, and he went to our home on the hillside, the Water Care Institution in Dansville, New York. That Dr. Jackson, Caleb Jackson, the owner, the chief physician, said, Brother White, your problem is you're too religious. You're just too serious. That's how come you're sick. What you need to do, Brother White, is to dance and play checkers. And so James White went on the therapy of social dancing and checker play. And James liked it. Ellen thought otherwise. Ellen thought that James needed to get his mind and his body involved in useful activities that would help him recuperate. And so she pulled him out of Dansville, took him up to Greenville, Michigan, where they had a piece of property. Meanwhile, the Battle Creek Adventists were howling that she was killing her husband. But she got him up there, and somehow they had, well, she did all kinds of things. People would come in to have questions answered about the Bible. She wanted to be mentally active. And so she'd get the questions, she'd get the conversation started, then she'd kind of slip out the door. So James had to answer the questions to become mentally active. And then the problem was how to become physically active. And so, in the middle of winter, something had to be done, like go get the wood. James said, I'm too sick. She said, okay, I guess I'll have to do it. You let a woman do your work. And she'd shame him into getting busy. So James said, I can't let a woman do that. I'll have to do it. And so he got out and he got busy. Well, come the summer, somehow they had a crop in the ground, and James said, I'm too sick. I can't harvest this. I'm a weak man. I've had a stroke. Ellen says, no, you can. You just got to try. I don't want to try. He says, I'm going to get the neighbors to help me. They'll do it. So James went out the front door. Ellen White put her sneakers on and went out the back door, and she beat him to every neighbor. She says, don't say to James, but when he comes, just refuse. Just say you're too busy. You can't help. But James comes in that night. He's all discouraged. He says, I can't believe it, Ellen. All the things we've done for these people, not one of them will help me. Ellen said, I guess we'll have to do it. She says, James, you drive. I'll ride on the back and stack the hay, and Willie can toss it up. And through a series of procedures like that, of getting James involved in useful mental and physical activities, his cure took place. Ellen White knew what she was talking about. She knew what she had to do. Meanwhile, back in Battle Creek, the Adventists started their own health care institution, Western Health Reform Institute, that would later become the Battle Creek Sanitarium. And there was only one Adventist physician in all the world at that time. His name was Horatio S. Lay. And Dr. Lay had worked in Danville, New York with Dr. Jackson. And Dr. Lay wanted to create a similar type institution, and he was smart enough to leave the dancing off the agenda. But he did bring checkers. And Ellen White suggested useful activity, not checkers. That's where the first checker statement came from. My guess is that she might have thought checkers was good for some things, but it wasn't good for recuperation, or overdone for that matter. Well, so that testimony came out, and then somebody wrote into the review. Back in those days, you could write just about anything into the review, and somebody said, who is Ellen White to talk about playing checkers when everybody knows she carries a game around in her suitcase? Well, that brought forth another statement on checkers, denying the fact that she carried one around. But anyway, there's a history behind every statement. Either a person, or an institution, or a problem, or in this case, a correction. Sometimes we take Ellen White's statements and we take them too far. Yeah. Not knowing the context, for example, about the playing of football over in Australia. The problem is the Australians, that's all they wanted to do, was play ball. Later on, she'll say, I'm not against playing ball. It's the overdoing of it, when that becomes the center of your life. And but we make her into such an immoderate person. But I want to go now. I want to go to some statements that show Ellen White interpreting her own writings. Okay? Now, before we go there, I want to just talk about inspired statements, whether they be the Bible or Ellen White. Every statement has the potential of having two different kinds of statements within it. Principles that are universal. A universal principle is true throughout time and space. And then there's particulars of time and place. Universal principles, particulars of time and place, particulars of time and place are based upon a principle. It's the principle that's universal. Let me give an illustration. In the book Education, Ellen White says that every girl should learn how to harness a horse and drive a buggy. Now, I don't think that we ought to be teaching our girls to harness horses unless they're taking a course in horsemanship. It's not a universal need, but there's a principle there. The principle is they ought to be self-sufficient in transportation. In other words, they should take driver's ed. They should learn how to drive a car and change a tire. That's the principle. They ought to be sufficient in transportation. It's like she would say that young boys should be able to bake bread. Still not a bad idea there. Teach your boys to cook so they don't have to end up like Slavs in those 2 or 3 years between mama and wife. Now, Oh, by the way, we talked about the shortening of the dresses, 8 or 9 inches, and how that didn't fit into the mini-skirt era. Well, when she wrote that about shortening the dresses 8 or 9 inches, there was a good reason. And that is, the dresses were dragging on the ground. And we think automobile pollution is bad, but you know what we had before automobiles?
Horse poop.
Called horses. And the horse droppings were not cleaned up. They just laid there and multiplied as the days went on. In the summertime, people didn't have air conditioning, so their windows were open. They didn't have screens in most cases. So the traffic going by outside, the horse manure just flavored everything. It was a part of life. In the wintertime, it made wonderful mud, right up to about here. And the urine, I mean, somewhere in the book, Ellen White's World, I talk about how many gallons of horse urine there was every day. And of course, they didn't have garbage service. New York City used hogs. People throw their stuff out in the yard, and the hogs came through and cleaned it up. That's how they took care of their garbage. I mean, this was our largest city. I mean, it's hard to believe that so much has changed so quick. But anyway, so these, and the male pastime was spitting. Cigarettes were not in, chewing was, chewing tobacco. And if you ever chewed the stuff, you know you better spit it pretty quick. I never chewed it. I just assumed work on a beetle nut. Nasty stuff. And a fair portion of the population had tuberculosis, for which there was no cure at that time. Meanwhile, here's these dresses and whalebone corsets, which are squeezing them the ladies half to death to get down to about an 18-inch waist or 15 or whatever they were aiming at. And here's these dresses up to 40 pounds dragging through all this horse manure and human sputum. By the way, males even spit in the house. Spittoons were a late development. Polite males did not spit on the table. They spit on the floor. Impolite males spit on the table. And you got all this tubercular stuff running around and all this horse poop. And here's these ladies dragging this stuff, and Ellen White said, in that situation, skirts should be shortened 8 or 9 inches. Now, you know, when I wanted to use that for the miniskirt era, since an Ellen White quotation settles all problems, it obviously didn't fit.
Yeah.
Even if there had been horse manure down there, them skirts, they'd have to practically lay on the ground to get it to touch it.
Is that early to mid 1800s?
What's that?
Is that early to mid 1800s, 1850s?
Yeah. That would probably be the earlier part of Ellen White's industry. Yeah. And then, of course, you got the Bloomer Revolution. But the problem with the bloomers was, and what they called the American costume, with the pants hanging out the bottom of the dresses, is the women became liberated. It was the women's liberation movement. You see, what happened was the women organized to get the slaves freed. And then the slaves had the right to vote, and the women didn't. They went for another 50 years. But anyway, at the same time, women began to flex their muscles for the first time. So they started smoking in public, all that kind of stuff. And so the bloomers had a bad name. So Ellen White tried to distance herself from the bloomers, but at the same time create a reformed dress. And she lived through a lot of interesting times that we can hardly even begin to imagine that they actually took place. The depths of ignorance. The health reformer, the reformer in general, was a necessary thing in 19th century America. And there were two great eras of reform. Before the Civil War, actually before about 1855, and then after 1865. But see, in here, this 1855 to 1865, one reform absorbed all the energies, and that was abolitionism, the freeing of the slaves. But before that, you had a wide range of reforms, which we'll talk about a little later. And then after that, a wide range of reforms. Education reform, health reform, and 1,000 other reforms. But meanwhile, the point I want to make is that every statement has, not every statement, behind it, every statement, there's a principle. So you can have two kinds of substatements. Principles of time and place, and, particulars of time and place, and universal principles. That brings me to probably the most revealing document we have on Ellen White interpreting her own writings. This ought to be required reading for Adventists. It's got a Council on School Age of Entrance. It's an interview of January 14, 1904. It's found in manuscript release 405. It was not discovered in the vault until 1975. It was so important they issued a whole issue of the review just on this one document. Well, it so happens.
405?
Manuscript release 405. It so happens. I don't know if it's got the cover sheet on there. It probably doesn't, which gives a background. You can get that from the White Estate, because the background is important. At any rate, part of it's now found in Third Selected Messages, but they kind of chopped it up. There was a school board in Northern California in the St. Helena Sanitarium in about 1902. And the school board got into a fierce argument over an Ellen White quotation. And they couldn't go forward and they couldn't go backward. They were at a dead stop. The issue was a quotation from Ellen White. The Third Selected Messages, page 137. Parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. Now, only is pretty good straight word, don't you think? That's straight testimony. Parents should be the only. She doesn't say if, and, or but. This is an unconditional sentence. Parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. Well, what was the problem on the school board? Should we have a lower department for the first and second grade? Half of the school board says, we are going to be faithful to Ellen White. We will have no lower department. The other half said, look, use your cotton picking brain. Both the parents are working in the sanitarium, the kids are running loose. Better to have them in school than to run loose. No, we have a statement from Ellen White. And we're going to go right up to it. And so here they are. School board can't even do business anymore because they got this big problem. Now the interesting thing is that the school is located on Ellen White's property. And she lives there. So they invite her down for a school board meeting. And these are the minutes of the meeting. And if you read them, if you ever get upset at board meetings, I don't sleep well after board meetings lots of times. There's just too many idiots in one room at one time.
So did it change since then?
Oh, man! It's one of the real ones, you know. Oh, this is a real document. Interesting reading. And so, at first, they will let Ellen White speak. Sister White spoke for a time as follows. Those who assume the responsibilities of parenthood should first consider whether they will be able to surround their children with proper influences. And we have a general principle. The home is both a family church and a family school. She's putting the high place of the home first. I believe this. The school is only an auxiliary to the educational role of the parents. The church is only an auxiliary. The church is not the central institution of society, it's the family. Churches and schools are to help families. In fact, when I was a principal, by the time the people got their kids in at age 6, I could look at those kids and I'd look at the parents and they'd say, too late. They were already shaped. They'd already determined their approach to authority, toward learning, toward reading. The parents had done their role one way or the other, either consciously or unconsciously. So here's the ideal. The home is both a family church and a family school. Mothers, now watch her language. She's starting to explain her statement. Should be able to instruct their little ones wisely during the early years of childhood. If every mother were capable of doing this. What is she saying? Not all mothers are even capable of educating their children rightly. Okay? So we'll start over. She's taking an unconditional statement. Parents should be the only teachers of their statement to children till they reach 8 or 10 years of age. Mothers should be able to instruct their little ones wisely during the earlier years of childhood. If every mother were capable of doing this and would take the time. Well, there's another condition. Some may be capable but aren't willing. Okay? And would take the time to teach her children the lessons they should learn in early life. Then all children could be kept in the home school until they're 8 or 9 or 10 years of age. Here's Ellen White interpreting her own writings. She makes a very strong statement. Parents should be the only. And then the real situation. You see, you got the ideal and the real. The reality is that some parents can't, and others won't. And some can't and won't. So she's beginning to take an unconditional statement and make it conditional. She goes on. But many who enter the marriage relation fail of realizing all the sacred responsibility that motherhood brings. Such children drift hither and thither. There is nobody in the home capable of guiding them aright. Children who are surrounded by these unfortunate conditions are indeed to be pitied. If not afforded an opportunity for proper training outside the home, they are debarred from many privileges that by right every child should enjoy. Those who are unable to train their children aright should never have assumed the responsibility of parents. Like, that's nice. But what do you do with them after they're hatched? You know what I mean. You can't send them back. And I've discovered that sometimes the least capable parents have the most chickens. You know what I mean? I mean, there's an ideal, but that you got these kids running around, you got to do something with them. Those who are unable to train their children aright should never have assumed the responsibilities of parents. But because of their mistaken judgment, should make no effort to help their little ones to form right characters. Now listen to the next one. God desires us to deal with these problems sensibly. Oh, I'm so glad she said that. Because if I said it, it would be explaining away the straight testimony. Use your brain. You know what? Most Adventists believe, at least of the traditional variety, if you've got a quotation, you don't have to make sense. You just do faith. You just go with the quotation. You're going to be faithful because Ellen White said it. So you can make nonsense if you have a quotation, which is what was happening in this school. God desires us to deal with these problems sensibly. But, she says, here's the work. It must be done for the families and for the children that are as old as 7 years old and 8 and 9. We should have a lower department. That is a second department where these children can be instructed. By the time she gets finished with this, she's advocating kindergartens. And then she goes on. But when I heard what the objections were, that the children could not go to school till they were 8, after they were 10 years old, she's referring back to her statement. But when I heard what the objections were, that the children could not go to school till they were 10 years old, I wanted to tell you that there was not a Sabbath-keeping school when the light was given to me that the children should not attend school until they were old enough to be instructed. So here she's rooting it in history. Times have changed. Here's my favorite one. She's going to quote her faithful followers. I want you to watch how she does it. She's a pretty spicy old lady. That is how it is. And my mind has been greatly stirred in regard to the idea why, she's using quotation marks, why Sister White has said so-and-so, and Sister White has said so-and-so, and therefore we're going right up to it. She's quoting her followers. What's her comment on that approach? God wants us all to have common sense.
Yeah.
Now, and He wants us to reason from common sense. Circumstances alter conditions. Circumstances change the relation of things. Look around and see what the situation is. Don't just run with a quotation and go up to it because you got a quotation. Use your brain. Use sense. Therefore, I from the light that God has given me declare if there is a family that has not the capabilities of educating nor discipline their government over their children requiring obedience, the very best thing is to put them someplace where they will obey. Now you see, she's operating at two different levels. The ideal, it would be wonderful if parents were capable and willing to take this undertaking. The reality is, some aren't willing, some aren't capable. Therefore, we need a lower department of the school. The ideal, and the real. So we find several different principles coming out here. Use common sense, the difference between the ideal and the real. See, the problem is with some Adventists, they only take the strongest statements, the ideal statements. And in the process, they make Ellen White into some kind of a monster. Or as I like to say it, they've created Ellen White in their own image. Just as fanatical as they are. So it goes on. Then I know I'm going to pick this up here. There we go. If, Ellen White again, if the mother has not the tact, the ingenuity, if she does not know how to treat human minds, she must put them under somebody that will discipline and mold and fashion their minds. Then Elder W.C. White, her son. I find, Mother, that our people throughout the states and throughout the world, I must say, sometimes make very far-reaching rulings based on an isolated statement. Now, in my study of the Bible, and in my study of your writings, I've come to believe that there is a principle undergirding every precept, that we cannot understand properly the precept without grasping the principle. Elder White going on, I have supposed that this school question was the same. The ideal plan is that the mother should be the teacher, but I have felt that it was a great misfortune to our cause that people should take that statement that the child should have no teacher but the parent who was 8 or 10 years old, as a definite forbidding of those children to have school privileges. When the brethren study this matter from the standpoint of the good of the child, from the standpoint of the fairness to the parents, as far as I can see, they all acknowledge that there are conditions in which it would be better for the child to have some school privilege than to be ruled out. But there is a precept. A child shall have no teacher but its parents until 8 or 10, and that settles it. Sister White. Well, if the parents have not got it in them, you might as well stop where you are. Therefore, we've got to make provision, because there are a good many parents that have not taken it upon themselves to discipline themselves. That, to me, is a classic statement of Ellen White. It's actually the best statement we have on Ellen White interpreting a straight testimony. You know what a straight testimony is? It's when you can ram right through your neighbor, somewhat like a javelin. It uses words like only and never. And here's Ellen White interpreting an unconditional statement. In the process, she lays down several principles of interpretation. Now, by the way, on the exam, the question came up when some of you were out, and that is, on the principles of interpretation of Ellen White, I don't want everything you know. Just give me the 5 or 6 best ones and discuss them a little bit and give some illustrations, okay? Okay. That brings us to the Avondale School. The first educational institution, the first college that we had, was in Battle Creek, Michigan. In Battle Creek, Michigan, in 1872, they founded a school that would become Battle Creek College in 1874. For the college, they bought about 12 acres of land on the edge of Battle Creek, right joining the city. And they thought they had so much acres, they sold about half of it. So the school was crammed onto about 5 or 6 acres. They didn't teach Bible. They had no Bible class. In fact, the only religion class at all, it wasn't even an official class. Old Uriah Smith used to hobble over on his one leg. Remember we talked about him getting sawed off at the kitchen table when he was a young boy, with anesthetics or anesthesia, nothing. Anyway, he used to hobble over on his one good leg and teach Daniel Revelation, but not too many people showed up. I don't think he was an inspiring speaker. And they didn't teach any practical things that people could learn, or give them missionary skills, or anything. In fact, it said in the bulletin, this is a paraphrase, but I've got it quoted from several different places in their bulletins, that you can come to this institution and won't even know that it's Adventist. I mean, that's kind of, nothing is going to, we've got nothing to say about our religion. We're just nice people. Well, for a school that had been founded to train ministers and missionaries, Ellen White thought it was just a wee bit short. But nobody knew what to do about it. And so they kind of struggled along for about 20 years. At the end of 20 years, Ellen White and many other of the reforming part of the church happened to be located in Australia, a new mission field. And there they could experiment. They were just the proper distance away from the brethren, about 12,000 miles. And so they felt free to experiment. And so they created a school, not on 5 acres, but on 1,500 acres. Separated a wide distance from the cities. I was just over there about 2 months ago, and as I recall, it's about 70 kilometers, about a little less than 50 miles away from Sydney. It's really out there. It was in the boonies. And they put Bible at the center. And they had practical work experience. People could get a job when they got out of there. And they had a missionary emphasis. Ellen White was excited about the Avondale School. She called it an object lesson for other Adventist schools, a sample school, a model school. These are all different places she talks about Avondale. A pattern school. In 1900, Ellen White categorically stated that the school in Avondale is to be a pattern for other schools, which shall be established among our people. Ellen White was high on Avondale. It was a reform institution. Unfortunately, people read those statements, and it is natural in Adventism when Ellen White makes a strong statement, they took it to extremes. They called the Avondale School the blueprint. I don't hear this much anymore, but when I first came into the church, the blueprint. And we got what I call the lunatics. The blueprinters. A blueprint, you never vary, man. You do just what the blueprint says. You've got no choice. You must follow the blueprint. Ellen White didn't ever use the word blueprint. In fact, she will say just the opposite. I read a quotation. No, that's not the one I want. I guess it is the one I want. This is written many years after Avondale. I now find it in the Councils of Teachers, page 531. She says, no exact pattern can be given for the establishment of schools in new fields. Well, that goes directly against the lunatic mentality. The climate, the surroundings, the condition of the country, and the means at hand with which to work must all bear a part in shaping the work. What's she doing? Yeah, Avondale's a model. It's a pattern for every other school. But what does she say? Look at the needs of the field. Look at what you have to work with, that is how much money. Look at all the factors, and then form your school to meet the purpose and need here. Flexible? Yes. I first wrote this as a chapter in my book, Myths in Adventism. The first chapter is called The Myth of the Inflexible Prophet. Ellen White was very flexible. It's some of her followers who were inflexible and rigid. Again, Manuscript 170, 1901. Years after the Avondale experience, the Lord has not designed any one special exact plan in education. Now, these are in the face of a statement that says, multiple statements that say Avondale is the pattern, Avondale is the object lesson. Ellen White was anything but inflexible. And here is my favorite statement. Also, Fundamental of Christian Education, page 312, and I liked it because it starts with the word never. Now, when you have never, you have a quotation that you can use like an axe. Like a machete. Now, well, you've hit a jewel if it says never. Now you know you've got something important. This is written while Avondale School was being founded. Never. Never can the proper education be given to the youth in this country or any other country. Wow, this is a good statement. Never means universal in terms of time. This country or any other country means, man, there's no exceptions in terms of space. Oh, man, you can't slip out of this one. I got you nailed to the wall. Never can the proper education be given to the youth in this country or any other country unless they are separated a wide distance from the cities. Well, Avondale was 50 miles. That's a wide distance. And she gives the reasons. The customs and practices in the cities unfit the minds of the youth for the entrance of the truth. Let me just give an illustration, because I believe in this. Before I went to Andrews, all my work had been city work. And the old Houston Junior Academy, where that post office is now, I don't know how it is now, because I've only been back one time in the last 30-something years.
They sold it now.
I know. I had a hard time finding the property. After working there 5 years, I couldn't believe I couldn't find our own property. And I found a post office sitting there. And it used to be that you could not get to that place on any main street without crossing totally nude joints, nightclubs, with all the illustrations on the outside. I mean, my kids had to look at that stuff every day when they came to school. Totally nude joints. And we used to own the whole city block, but before I had got there, a decade or two before, they had sold half of it out to apartment houses. So apartment houses surrounded it, and on Monday morning I had to go out on the playground and pick up the main mining equipment and the prophylactics thrown out the window. That was my play yard. And do I believe what Ellen White's talking about? Yeah. Yeah, I believe it. Like I said, my first work was in San Francisco in 1964. The only place that would have had to tell me, you weren't here, so I'll tell you. My senior pastor, the only counsel he gave me is never go into a man's room unless he's fully dressed. Because even before the gay revolution, San Francisco was already the headquarters of that place. Here I was, as a young pastor, 23 years old, and he thought that I probably needed all the protection I could get because some of the guys might think I was cute, you know. I do believe that country living is better, okay? And that country education. To raise your kid in the country, you're better off than in the city any day. I still remember, I had a bunch of Hispanic boys, and they were running around with a group there that was sniffing everything that could be sniffed. One of the boys was sniffing a bunch of lacquer paint, killed him. Not one of mine, but it did make a nice object lesson to talk about the next day. Watch out what you put in your nose. I mean, not that these kind of things can't happen in the country, but I'm telling you, at least you've got some natural surroundings without the people pollution crowding you out too bad. Okay, so here we are. Never! Oh boy, oh boy. Statement is close to my heart. Never!
What page?
This is 312. Fundamentals. Never can the proper education be given to the youth in this country or any other country unless they are separated a wide distance from the cities. The customs and the practices of the cities unfit the minds of the youth for the entrance of truth. Now, when this statement got loose, it changed the shape of Adventist education. Why is it, do you think, that Keene is out here in the middle of nowhere? Instead of being in Dallas or Fort Worth.
Or Andrews University.
Oh, well, no, Andrews University had been in the city. It had been in Battle Creek. When this statement got loose, man, they sold their 5 acres and went out to the wilds of Berrien Springs and bought several hundred acres out on the edge of the St. Joseph River. No, they were going to be faithful, so they sold their property. Same thing in Northern California. They had a place called Healdsburg College in the little village of Healdsburg. And they sold out that property and bought up at the top of Howell Mountain, way up on top of the hill. That's where I graduated. We used to say it was 10 miles away from the nearest known sin. And back in those days, the students didn't have cars. Just a few of the students had cars, so they had to stay up there. Now, man, they're all down to San Francisco on the weekend. It's not the same. But we had a community. And in fact, the community reminded me of Montemorelos 10 years ago. I'm at Montemorelos. This is an illustration of what our schools used to be like before all the kids had cars. And here I am, man. I'm preaching Friday night in the church. They just opened that building. I think I was one of the first people to have a Friday night meeting there. And it was 15 years ago. Only 15, because they went back 10 years ago. Yeah, about 15. And so here I am, holding meetings Friday night, man, we're going, and I don't get finished preaching until about 10 o'clock, and then a bunch of the young people say, oh, come preach to us. I said, okay, I'll go preach to them until about 10:30 or about 11:30. And then I'm walking back to the Hilton. That's what they call the little apartment there for the guests. I'm walking back to the Hilton, and here's all these student groups meeting around, studying the Bible and preaching to each other and sharing ideas. And I'm saying, man, alive, I wish our schools were still like this in the States. These people ever get cars, they've ruined their ambient. When we moved out in the country, they didn't have anything else to do but talk with each other and go to church and have vespers on Friday night and Saturday night and go skating or something in the gym. I don't know what they do in Montemorelos, but we used to go skating in the gym. And they'd have some travel log or something come in. It made the school into a community because the schools were isolated. And so around the world, this is one of Ellen White's most influential statements. Around the world, Adventist education became rural. And they bought large amounts of land. And as a result, in many places we are very wealthy today, because the cities came out and surrounded our large pieces of land. You take São Paulo, Brazil. In São Paulo, Brazil, what's left of our old campus is right up on top of a hill. The barrios have come around and surrounded it, so now it's surrounded by city. But at one time it was out in the open. But they had hundreds and thousands of acres that they sold off. And in some places, like Singapore, when they sold that, they became virtually wealthy. And so what did they do? They created Mission College in Thailand, which, whew, one of the most beautiful campuses I've ever seen for a relatively poor country. Then they created the Mansion, the Philippine Division headquarters. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Oh. Enough to make me stop giving mission offerings right there. But they had all this money, and now the city has come up, surrounded their schools. They sell the school eventually, sometimes, and they've got all this money. And so many things have happened because of this statement. But meanwhile, here we are. We think that Alvarado is a big city from here. We're out in the country, even though the village continues to grow up around it. And I don't know if the early Adventists would have ever imagined at the edge of campus you've got what's that fingernail polish called over there?
Oh, I don't know. I know what
the fingernail polish or something like that. And right next to that's the donut shop, and right next to that's the pizza shop. I don't think that's probably what the pioneers had in mind for the institutions facing the school. So, even in the village of Keene, we have these interesting little things. It used to be, I read in the secular newspaper one time that Keene was the only town in America that didn't have a police department.
You know
but
what?
they got one now.
Last week, in one of the most important newspapers here in the Metroplex, there's one for Dallas and one for Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And he talked about myths about Keene.
Yeah.
That the city is trying to bring new companies into Keene. So they wrote that in Keene, police, they do wear guns. In Keene, you can have barbecue on Friday night. In Keene, you can eat meat. Trying to put all those myths away so people would come here and put their business in our because the reputation of the town is all around. Yeah.
That's also in Mountain View College where I graduated. It's 1,000 I think 200 acres.
Yep. That's
Top,
pretty-
top of a mountain. The
pretty
highest
standard.
is the highest peak in central Mindanao, Philippines.
Mhm.
And that's why it's cold.
And I imagine that Philippine, what they call now Philippine Union University.
Yeah, Adventist,
Philippine
Adventist
Union College.
Philippine University.
That was out in the country at one time too.
Yeah.
But now, of course.
But now it's congested, so they
Yeah.
moved to Silang, which is now Adventist University of the Philippines.
Well, very influential statement. Never, in the proper education children be given, here or anywhere else, unless they're separated a wide distance from the city. I have no problem with that statement. I love it. I'm a country person. I retired a long ways. In fact, the town of Rogue River has about 4,000 people in it, and I live 4 miles away from that. And behind me is government land. I have a mountain behind me, and nothing's on that mountain. It's all mine. Just government land up there. Yeah, we got all kinds of stuff. We got bears going through our yard, mountain lions, turkeys, you name it, we got it. Although I've only one bear has walked through there since I've been there. That's enough. I know they're there. No, I'm a country boy. I lived in the city. That's good. I'm glad lots of people like to live there. That way they don't pollute my life. Okay, so the ideal is what? Schools in the country. That's the idea. And she doesn't leave room for any exceptions. Never! In this country or in any other country. And not just a wee bit away from the city, but a wide distance from the city. Now, the only problem was she also had an interest in city evangelism. And so, about 1910, we began to do massive evangelism in the cities. And when we were there, we began to convert poor people. People that didn't have the money to move out in the country or send their children off to go to a school in the country. So the 9 volumes of the ninth volume of the Testimonies, page 201. Now this is the same woman speaking. Last time she started her statement how?
Never.
Never. Good, you guys got the memory verse down. New memory verse. So far as possible. Now she's talking about the reality. So far as possible, these schools should be established outside the cities. She's still got the same ideal. Country schools are still better. But, so far as possible, these schools should be established outside the cities, but in the cities, there are many children who could not attend schools away from the cities. And for the benefit of these, schools should be opened in the cities as well as in the country. Woo! Is this the same woman? Never? So far as possible? But she's operating at 2 different levels. The level of the real, the level of the ideal, and the level of the real. This is God's ideal. This is where the people are. 2 different levels. But once again, what do our people do? They grab the strongest statements. They take the ideal statements and they push them on everybody. Never. Only. You see. And they make Ellen White into something that she wasn't. An inflexible bigot. No. She was an extremely flexible person. As I always say, Ellen White has been slain in the house of her friends. Those who claim to be her faithful followers are usually farthest away from her. And you've probably got some in your church. I would imagine you have some fairly conservative people. And I know you do, because you guys both come from Roman Catholic countries, and Roman Catholics make very good Adventist legalists.
Yeah.
The Big Papa says something, the Big Mama says something.
No mixing of vegetables and fruits.
That's right.
Pastor, remember you got your vegetables. And I said, it's okay with me anyway, so I'll just take it. Because
Ellen White.
I'll take my fruit. Remember you take your vegetable a while ago.
Operated on the basis of principle. She knew what the goal was. She knew the ideal of how to reach the goal. She knew where the people were. And rather than lose out altogether, she modified. Should we say compromised? It's all right to have a school in the city because these people are poor. We don't want to use the word compromise because it has nasty overtones, okay? No, she modified her counsel to meet people where they were. You know, when I do these presentations in public forums, people just can't believe that this is the same woman that they'd heard about. That she could be so moderate and so bending in the face of what she said. I'm sure glad she said it, because I can get hung for saying this kind of stuff, okay? Okay. Let's see what we got here. I think we'll take a 10-minute break, and this time it will be a 10-minute break, not 12. Come back at 20 minutes till for our last hour of the day. We'll finish up this topic. Tomorrow morning we hit the ground running with unclean foods.